Hello, this is Chapter 9, Regional Economic Integration. Our learning objectives are describe the different levels of regional economic integration, understand the economic and political arguments for regional economic integration, understand the economic and political arguments against regional economic integration, explain the history, current scope, and future prospects of the world's most important regional economic agreements, and lastly, understand the implications for management practice that are inherent in regional economic integration agreements. Okay. Regional trade blocs promote regional economic integration. WTO must be notified. Economists believe free trade agreements produce gains from trade for all member countries. GATT and WTO seek to reduce trade barriers, but reaching agreements is difficult. EU has been the most ambitious move toward regional economic integration. And some of these regional trade bloc agreements include NAFTA, USMCA, which is the agreement after NAFTA, Mercosur, and RCEP. There are several levels of economic integration possible in theory, from least to most integrated. First, you have a free trade area, then a customs union, common market, economic union, and then a political union. In a free trade area, it eliminates all barriers to the trade of goods and services among member countries. Each country is allowed to determine its own trade policies regarding non-members. Rule of origin. Most enduring is the European Free Trade Association between Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. And then you have NAFTA and USMCA. Customs union eliminates trade barriers between member countries and adopts a common external trade policy. The EU began as a customs union. The Andean Community, formerly the Andean Pact, includes Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. A common market, no restrictions on immigration, emigration, or cross-border flows of capital among member countries, requires harmony and cooperation on fiscal, monetary, and employment policies. This proved very difficult. Mercosur, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay is hoping to establish a common market. Venezuela accepted for membership but was suspended due to their undemocratic policies. Economic union, free flow of products, and factors of production among member countries, and the adoption of a common external trade policy. It requires a high degree of integration, a coordinating bureaucracy, and the sacrifice of national sovereignty of the bureaucracy. An example of that will be the EU. Political union. Central political apparatus coordinates economic, social, and foreign policy of member states. EU headed toward at least partial political union, and the US is even closer example of a political union. You can just see how each of them got a concentric circle here, and you see how the different integration flows through. The economic case for integration. Well, all countries gain from free trade and investment, and it's a positive sum game. Assumes an absence of barriers and motivated by a desire to exploit gains from free trade and investment. The political case for integration, it's linking countries together and making them more dependent on each other, promotes political cooperation. It also reduces the likelihood of violent conflict, and it gives countries greater political clout when dealing with other nations. Regional economic integration is only beneficial if the amount of trade it creates exceeds the amount it diverts. Trade creation, trade diversion. WTO rules should ensure that a free trade agreement does not result in trade diversion. However, GATT and WTO do not cover some non-tariff barriers. EU has two trading blocs. One is the EU. Europe has two trading blocs. One is the EU. It has 27 members, and Britain left in 2020. If you recall, it was called Brexit. Number two is the European Free Trade Association, and there's 4 members of that. The evolution of the European Union is the product of 2 political factors. One, the devastation of Western Europe during 2 world wars, and the desire for a lasting peace. European nations desire to hold their own on the world's political and economic stage. The Treaty of Rome established the EU, or the European Community, and provided for the creation of a common market. It later became the European Union. Here's the member states of the European Union in 2020. You can see that they are in gold, and they're all in here. Political structure of the European Union, the European Commission. It proposes EU legislation, implements it, and monitors compliance. It's run by commissioners appointed by member countries and approved by the European Parliament. The role in competition policy has become increasingly important in business. The European Council is the ultimate controlling authority within the EU, one representative from the government of each member state. Political structure of the European Union. The European Union contains 705 members elected by member states. It debates legislation proposed by the Commission and forwarded to it by the Council. The Treaty of Lisbon increased power of the Parliament. The Court of Justice, one judge from each country, Supreme Appeals Court for EU law. Okay, the Single European Act and the objectives of the Act: remove all frontier controls among EC countries, apply the principle of mutual recognition to product standards, and institute open public procurement for non-national suppliers. Also, lift barriers to competition in the retail banking and insurance business. Remove all restrictions on foreign exchange transactions between member countries by the end of 1992, and abolish restrictions on cabotage by the end of 1992. The Single European Act continued. The impact: impetus for restructuring substantial sections of industry. The expectation is going to foster faster economic growth, and it's going to establish legal, cultural, and language differences, creating uneven implementation. The establishment of the euro in the Maastricht Treaty, it committed the EU to adopt a single currency, which is the euro. It's used by 19 of the member states, and second most widely traded currency after the US dollar. Great Britain, Denmark, and Sweden chose not to use the euro. The establishment of the euro continued. The benefits of the euro: its savings from handling only one single currency. It lowers foreign exchange and hedging costs. It also makes it easy to compare prices across Europe, increasing competition. Producers forced to look for ways to reduce production costs because boosts development of highly liquid pan-European capital market, and it increases investment options. The establishment of the euro continued. The costs of the euro: lots of control over national monetary policy. The European Central Bank, or ECB, is the prime organization. EU is not an optimal currency area because many European economies are dissimilar. The establishment of the euro continued. Volatile trading history since establishment in 1999, and Europe has weakened since 2008. Slow economic growth and large budget deficits among several states. Bailout package to rescue Greece in 2010. Some newer nations holding off adoption of the euro. With the enlargement of the European Union, expansion into Eastern Europe, 13 additional countries applied by the end of the 1990s. Applicants had to prioritize state assets, deregulate markets, tame inflation, establish stable democratic governments, and respect of human rights. New members had to wait to adopt the euro. East European communities only account for 5% of the GDP of current EU members. Turkey denied entry because of human rights concerns. The British exited from the European Union, or Brexit, and British electorate voted to leave in 2016, formally left in 2020. And it was based on the loss of their national sovereignty and immigration issues. The EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement established a zero tariff, zero quota trade regime between EU and UK. Britain's exit is of concern for EU because it's seen as the counterweight to the economic power of Germany. For Britain to benefit, it must be able to negotiate trade deals with the EU. And there's also a move toward greater regional integration into the Americas. The biggest effort is the NAFTA, and that was currently superseded by the USMCA. Other efforts include the Andean Community and Mercosur. NAFTA is a free trade area among Canada, Mexico, and U.S., abolished tariffs on 99% of goods traded between members, removed barriers on the cross-border flow of services. It also protects intellectual property rights, and it removes most restrictions on FDI between members. It allows each country to apply environmental standards, and it established two commissions to impose fines and remove trade privileges when environmental standards or legislation involving health and safety, minimum wage, or child labor are ignored. The case for NAFTA. Mexico would benefit from increased jobs as low-cost production moves south and more rapid economic growth as a result. US and Canada would benefit from access to a large and increasingly populous market, lower prices for consumer from goods produced in Mexico, lower cost labor and ability to be competitive in world markets, and also increased by Mexico. The case against NAFTA, jobs would be lost and wage levels would decline in the US and Canada. Pollution would increase due to Mexico's more lax standards, and Mexico would lose its sovereignty. NAFTA, the results. NAFTA, early impact was subtle, and both advocates and detractors may have been guilty of exaggeration. Overall impact small, but positive. Employment effects of NAFTA have been moderate to small. Mexico and the United States saw small welfare gains. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, politicians on both sides took aim at NAFTA, saying it created job losses in the U.S. NAFTA renegotiated the USMCA. Automakers must produce 75% of content in North America. By 2023, 40% of parts for tariff-free vehicles must come from a high-wage factory, and open the Canadian dairy market to U.S. producers. To become law, it must be ratified by legislators in all three countries. The Andean Community, formed in 1969 based on an EU model, had failed to achieve objectives by the mid-1980s, was relaunched in 1990. Goal to become a common market by 1995 not reached. Renamed the Andean Community in 97. Signed an agreement in 2005 with Mercosur to restart negotiations towards the creation of a free trade area. Mercosur originated in 1988 as a free trade pact between Brazil and Argentina, expanded in 1990 to include Paraguay and Uruguay, and in 2012 with the addition of Venezuela. Venezuela suspended in 2016 may be diverting trade rather than creating trade, and local firms are investing in industries that are not competitive on a worldwide basis. Efforts stalled on reducing trade barriers between member states. Central American Common Market, or CAFTA, and CARICOM, Central American Common Market, early 1960s, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. It collapsed in 1969 due to the war, and the Central America Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, 2004, U.S. and Central American Common Market. Central American Common Market, CAFTA, and CARICOM continued. CARICOM, 1973. English-speaking Caribbean countries repeatedly failed to achieve economic integration. Caribbean Single Market and Economy, CMSE, 2006, modeled on the EU's first single market. Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, formed in 1967. Bear with me a second. Currently includes Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. It fosters free trade between member countries and achieve cooperation in industrial policies. ASEAN Free Trade Area between the 6 original members of ASEAN came into effect in 2023. ASEAN and AFTA moving towards establishing a free trade zone. Regional trade blocs in Africa, 19 trade blocs on the African continent. Since many countries support the use of trade barriers to protect their economies from foreign competition, meaningful progress is slow. The East African Community, or EAC, relaunched in 2001, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Established a common market in 2010 and is moving toward goal of monetary union. The Tripartite Free Trade Area in 2015, and the Continental Free Trade Area, CAFTA, in 2018. And then we got some other agreements as well. Renewed emphasis on bilateral and multilateral trade agreements since collapse of the Doha round talks. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, U.S. exited agreement under Trump, renamed the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, negotiations were held, and Comprehensive Economic Partners, RCEP. Regional economic integration opportunities. It opens new markets. It allows firms to realize cost economies by centralizing production in those locations where the mix of factor, costs, and skills is optimal. Also, the enduring cultural differences and competitive practices must limit ability to realize cost economies. Business environment becomes competitive. Competitors might become more efficient. Risk of being shut out of the single market by the creation of a trade fortress. There's also growing opposition to free trade areas. Renegotiation of NAFTA, U.S. removed from TPP and Brexit. And that's all I have for you. Thank you for listening and have a great day.